Hi, this is Pat Sauer and Dr. Tom Rosberg. We have moved from the central part of the state over to the western part of the state where we're in the Loess Hills region. And Loess Hills these are wind-blown deposits after the glaciers receded in the Missouri Valley. The winds picked up and deposited very, very thick deposits of wind-blown or loess type soils, silt soils. Very susceptible to erosion, but they also provide habitat for different plant species, which we are going to get into. So Tom is going to provide a little bit more information here.
All right, we are in Preparation Canyon State Park, and we chose this site because Preparation Canyon has probably one of the more developed forest ecosystems in the Loess Hills. The Loess Hills were primarily all prairie when we looked at our native landscape, but there were pockets of more fire-protected landscape in places, and such as Preparation Canyon here, and I think probably one of the more developed forests is right here. So we're going to start with some forest species. All right, we're going to start with whatever we see here, and we have some Enchanter's Nightshade here. We saw this earlier in the spring at Reactor Woods. It wasn't in flower yet, but I pointed it out vegetatively. There's a small population of plants right here. We do have one, at least, that's in flower, so Pat might be able to come in closer and look at. It's actually in the light too. Stop it from moving. They're tiny little white flowers. Again, this is in the evening primrose family. Small, tiny white flowers. The leaves are kind of ovate shaped, egg shaped is what that means. Alternate. Well, excuse me, not. They are opposite. That's right. Leaves that are opposite each other. This one's got some damage from herbivores. So again, it's a pretty easy one to learn after you see it a few times. It'll produce little fruits that again cling to the fur and get spread around that way. All right, again, and that's not a true nightshade. Again, it's just goes by a misnomer. Enchanter's Nightshade. The scientific name is Cercia luteana. The next one that we found here is one we haven't seen yet. There's several plants right here. Here's one, the larger one up here. It has a kind of a purplish stem right here. And I'm going to squeeze this because, yep, as I suspect, it's hollow. I can feel that it's hollow. This purplish hollow stem tells me this is most likely Lactuca floridana, one of two species of blue lettuce that we have in Iowa. So in the aster family. It's not in flower yet. Flowers a little bit later in the summer. But again, as I was pointing out, this really reddish stem that's hollow. I can feel it when you squeeze it, you can feel the stem collapse. The leaves that are very deeply lobed. You see the really deep lobes here. Those are all pretty good indicators of Lactuca floridana or blue lettuce. Right down below it here is a grass species that we've seen quite a few plants of. Very distinctive. If you kind of see these are called spikelets here, the type of inflorescence that grasses have. A spikelet is just one of these little structures right here, and that's where the florets are, the tiny flowers that grasses have. Well, as you can see, this one is well named. Bottlebrush grass has spikelets that stick straight out and have awns, these slender hair-like structures that are coming out here. Those are some awns that are attached to the flowering parts here, and it looks like a bottle brush. Scientific name for this now is Elymus hystrix. Bottlebrush grass, again, you can see is really easy when it's in flower to recognize with that very characteristic shape of spikelets. Most of us, I think, kind of think this is a species that's more likely to be associated with more open woodlands. Here we're kind of in a closed forest here, but probably was more associated with a little bit more open woodlands, a little more sunny conditions, maybe a savanna. And then also right around it here, this bright green plant we see here. There's several of them here. This is a sedge, and I've not seen any of the flowering structures on any of these yet, but this one is most likely Sprengel's sedge, just by looking at it vegetatively here. Carex sprengelii, which, by the way, again, is another species that I consider to be somewhat of a savanna species. All right, and then we have a real common species of forest, this right over here. Several plants right in here. These are vegetative as well. These are opposite-leaved, ovate-shaped leaves. They often have leaf miners associated with them, as we can see on these leaves here. Some insect larvae mining the mesophyll portion of these leaves, leaving their trail. This is white snakeroot. White snakeroot, the old name Eupatorium rugosum. A real common species in forests, somewhat ubiquitous, sometimes covering quite a bit of the herbaceous layer. And it will have a white flower later in the summer. And let's point out one more here. We talked about this one at Reactor Woods. We were talking about spring blooming species and spring ephemeral species. Here's a leaf of bloodroot right here. So again, we pointed out that bloodroot is a spring blooming species, but it's not a spring ephemeral. And here's the evidence. Here's the leaves of it, coping well in the shade of the forest here. Right here we have Sweet Cicely. We saw this at Reactor Woods in vegetative condition. I talked about how to separate Sweet Cicely from anise root. Here we now have the fruits, so you are able to look at these fruits and again look for the style and see how long the style is here. And as I did that, I noticed the style is very, very short, less than a millimeter, about 1 millimeter at the most. So that means this would be Sweet Cicely. The pubescence that I can see down here on the stem, lower part of the stem, also helps to confirm that Sweet Cicely would be the more likely one. All right, Sweet Cicely, Osmorrhiza claytonia. The one we'd want to learn really well is wood nettle. Here's a plant of wood nettle. Alternate leaves, long petioles, pretty broadly ovate leaves. Wood nettles in the Urticaceae. This is Laportea canadensis. And I just got stung a little bit there by these stinging hairs that cover most of the plant, especially the stems. Short little hairs that function like a hypodermic needle, and when they come in contact with something such as the fingertip, inject a little bit of that chemical that they use it causes the irritation and causes the stinging, of course, to help protect them from herbivores. Wood nettle, relative of stinging nettle, but I would say this one is probably more potent than stinging nettle. One of the worst things to encounter if you're walking through a floodplain forest is a huge, vast population of wood nettle. We found some starry campion here. Let's take a look at it. That's a fairly easy one to learn to identify. It's got some flowers here, so 5 petals. And as you can see, these 5 petals are really deeply fringed, deeply lobed. Good characteristic for this species. As well as vegetatively, the whorled leaves. There's 4 leaves that arise from a single node along the stem here. And these leaves have margins that are called entire. That means they're smooth. There's no teeth or serrations along the edges of these leaves. That helps to separate it from Culver's root, which also often has 4 leaves in a whorl, if you're looking at the plants vegetatively. So this is Silene stellata, starry campion. And then up the trail, just a little ways here, another real common species in forests, especially damp soils, more floodplain forests, is this species here. This is called honewort, Cryptotaenia canadensis. There's a scientific name, honewort. It's in the parsley family. Doesn't have a whole lot for flowers, very small like other species in the same family. But again, if you maybe remember from, I think I talked about this at Doolittle Prairie, species in this family often have petioles that wrap around and kind of form a sheath type structure towards their base. You can kind of see a sheathing type of structure on these leaves here, as well as this one down here. Cryptotaenia canadensis, honewort. All right, we're stopped along the road here on our way out because we noticed this tall, kind of floriferous plant here with all of these light pink flowers on it. And if you look real close at those, you might recognize that that's a legume flower there. This is Desmodium glutinosum, a species of tick trefoil. It's very characteristic, of course, in terms of, recognizing it. It has this tall, very tall branching inflorescence that comes way above the leaves, the vegetative portion of the plant down here. The leaves, like most legumes, are compound leaves. Desmodiums have 3 leaflets. So again, this is one entire leaf here with 3 leaflets. You can see how circular or orbicular would be the term the terminal leaflet is here. The leaves are kind of all clustered together down here. They kind of all rise at a kind of just a short area along the stem down here. Pretty common in forests throughout the state. Desmodium glutinosum. It does have some sticky substances, or it kind of exudes a bit of a sticky substance along this peduncle here, this stalk of the inflorescence. I can feel some stickiness on it. I think that's what the term glutinosum is referring to. All right, then not too far away here, just a little ways down the edge, another species that we see quite often on the edges of forests, kind of in the ecotone area of a forest, is this sunflower right here. Now, without flowers, sunflowers can be somewhat challenging, and I can't be 100% sure, but just based on the shapes of these leaves, where we're at, the habitat here, say this is most likely Helianthus stromosus, the species that goes by the common name of woodland sunflower. And again, it's pretty characteristic for edges of forests where there's sort of partial shade, partial sun. And then I just see another one that I didn't notice earlier, but we'll go ahead and do this one too. A little bit further in here to the back, further back in is this plant right here. This is blue cohosh, Caulophyllum thalictroides. Blue cohosh. This is a pretty nice forest species. You see it's forming these really big fruits here, little berries. It has compound leaves as well. A lot of these plants have compound leaves. Kind of characteristic on this one are the 3 lobes that kind of form the margin at the end of the leaves here. Most of them all have 3 lobes, sort of a larger central lobe and a couple of lobes on the sides there. Blue cohosh.